I never thought I'd be one of those people writing about infidelity, but here I am. 5 years together, 3 of them married, and I thought we had something solid. Nicole and I had a life I was proud of, a cozy house, mutual respect, shared dreams. Or at least I thought we did. Things started to shift a couple of weeks ago, though, in ways that were subtle at first. Nicole started coming home later than usual. At first, it was the occasional late-night meeting, but then it became a habit. I didn't question it because her job in marketing was demanding, and I trusted her. But then one night, something happened that I just couldn't shake. Nicole came home at 10 p.m., hours later than she'd said she'd be back. She walked through the door looking a little flushed, her hair slightly messy like she'd been in a rush. I greeted her as usual, asking how her day went, but my eyes drifted down to her legs. That's when I noticed she wasn't wearing tights. It was the middle of December, cold enough that tights were practically a requirement under a dress. Nicole always wore them. She was the type who hated even the faintest chill. When I asked about it, she didn't even look at me. "Oh, they ripped earlier, so I tossed them," she said with a dismissive shrug, slipping off her heels and heading straight for the kitchen. It sounded reasonable enough, but something about the way she said it struck me as odd. It wasn't just the words, it was how rushed and rehearsed it felt. Like she'd anticipated the question and already had an answer ready. I let it slide at first. After all, why would I think anything of it? But later that night, as I sat in bed scrolling through my phone while she showered, the thought nagged at me. Why hadn't she mentioned the tights tearing earlier? And where had she thrown them away? Nicole climbed into bed, her phone in hand like always, and I noticed another detail that added to the growing unease. She kept her phone screen tilted away from me. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now, it felt intentional. I glanced at her face as the blue light illuminated her features. She was focused, her thumb scrolling rapidly. "Who are you texting so late?" I asked casually. She looked up, startled, like I'd caught her sneaking a cookie from the jar. "Just Ashley," she replied too quickly. Ashley was her best friend, and the excuse wasn't implausible. Still, my gut twisted. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in my head. Nicole had always been open, never hiding her phone or being defensive about her time. So why did this feel so off? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she'd had a rough day. Maybe I was overthinking a pair of torn tights. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the doubt had planted itself in my mind like a seed. Over the next few days, the cracks in our routine widened. Nicole started staying out later and being more vague about where she was going. She'd say things like, "I'm meeting the girls," or "I'll be home late, don't wait up." And every time, she had the same dismissive tone that kept me from asking too many questions. It wasn't just her words, though. It was her demeanor. The Nicole I knew was warm and attentive. Lately, she seemed distracted, like her mind was always somewhere else. I tried to brush it off, reminding myself that work had been hectic for her. But deep down, the doubt kept growing. One night, she came home late again, this time smelling faintly of wine and something else, a scent I couldn't quite place. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips soft but distant, and went straight to the bedroom. I sat on the couch, staring at the door she just closed behind her, my chest tightening with a feeling I couldn't name. That's when I knew. Something wasn't right. Nicole was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. I spent the next few days trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong, but the harder I tried, the more obvious the cracks became. Nicole was slipping away from me, not just physically but emotionally. She was there, but not really. Every conversation felt strained, every laugh forced. The moment I couldn't ignore came a week later. Nicole said she was meeting a friend for drinks after work. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder as she grabbed her coat and bag. She barely glanced at me before walking out the door, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. I told myself to trust her, that she deserved the benefit of the doubt. But something in the way she'd avoided eye contact all day had planted doubt in my mind. Hours passed, and I kept glancing at the clock. 8 p.m. 9. 10. Midnight. Nicole wasn't answering my texts. My calls went straight to voicemail. I felt like an idiot, sitting there on the couch, staring at my phone like some lovesick teenager. She came home at 2 a.m., the jingle of her keys pulling me out of my restless daze. I stood up as the door opened, and there she was, her hair slightly messy, makeup smudged, smelling faintly of perfume and wine. "Hey," she said casually, slipping off her heels. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's 2 in the morning, Nicole. I thought you were just getting drinks with a friend." She paused, clearly unprepared for my tone. "Yeah, we lost track of time. Sorry about that." "Who were you with?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to make her glance at me. "Ashley," she said, a little too quickly. The tension between us was suffocating, but before I could press further, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She wasn't wearing tights again. Her bare legs, pale and smooth, stood out against the short black dress she'd chosen. "Your tights ripped again?" I asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Her eyes flickered, and I could see the moment she realized her mistake. "Yeah, actually. I caught them on a chair and just tossed them. No big deal." My pulse quickened, but I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. "I see. Tough luck twice in 1 week." She didn't respond, instead heading to the bedroom without another word. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my mind racing. When I finally went to bed, she was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I lay there in the dark, my thoughts spiraling. Something about her story didn't sit right. The tights were too specific, too coincidental. The scent of her perfume was sharper, more intense, like it had been reapplied recently. And the wine wasn't just on her breath, it clung to her clothes. The next morning, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I was going to check her phone. It felt wrong, invasive, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that Nicole was hiding something. While she was in the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The screen was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. My stomach churned as I entered it, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. But I did. There it was, right at the top of her messages. "Rob." I opened the chat, and the pit in my stomach deepened with every message I read. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Last night was amazing. You looked so beautiful. Wish I could hold you again right now." My hands shook as I scrolled up, finding more messages. Plans to meet up, flirty banter, heart emojis. The tone of the conversation was unmistakable. This wasn't a colleague, a friend, or someone she was helping practice flirting, as I'd soon hear her claim. This was someone she was seeing behind my back. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, and then one message hit me like a punch to the gut. "Are you wearing those black tights again tonight? You looked incredible in them the other night." The shower stopped. I heard Nicole humming to herself as she stepped out of the bathroom. My breath caught as I scrambled to put the phone back where I'd found it. I barely managed to close my eyes and pretend to be asleep when she walked into the room. She slipped into bed, her presence so familiar yet suddenly alien. My heart ached, but my mind raced. I knew I couldn't stay silent for long. The next morning, I waited until she was pouring coffee to confront her. "Who's Rob?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. Nicole froze, the coffee pot mid-pour. Her back was to me, and I could see the tension ripple through her shoulders. Slowly, she turned around, her face carefully neutral. "What?" she said, her voice tight. I stared at her, my jaw clenched. "Rob. The guy who can't wait to see you tonight. The one who thinks last night was amazing." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. But then she smiled, a small, almost pitying smile. "Oh, him. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Her excuse was so ridiculous. I almost laughed. He's just a friend from work. He's terrible at flirting, so I've been helping him practice. It's nothing, David. You're overreacting. Overreacting, I said, my voice rising. You're texting some guy about last night being amazing, and I'm overreacting? Her smile faltered. We were acting out scenarios, that's all. It's innocent, I swear. The words were coming too quickly now, each one piling on top of the last, like she was trying to bury the truth under a mountain of lies. I shook my head, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Nicole, stop. I saw the messages. I know what's going on. Her expression hardened, the panic replaced with defiance. You're spying on me now? Is that what our marriage has come to? No, I said, my voice steady. What's ruined our marriage is you sneaking around with another man. Nicole stood there, staring at me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't panicking anymore. That brief glimpse of guilt had been replaced by something colder, harder. I'd expected an apology, maybe even tears. Instead, she seemed more focused on turning this around on me. So that's what this is, she said, her voice low but sharp. You think I'm sneaking around? Spying on me? Reading my messages? I felt a flare of anger rise in my chest. I wouldn't have to, Nicole, if you didn't give me a reason to. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. For a moment, it felt like a standoff, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the words I wanted to say all tripping over each other in my mind. I trusted you, I finally said, my voice quieter now. You've been distant, secretive. And then I find those messages. Last night was amazing. Wish I could hold you again. Do you honestly expect me to believe that's just practice flirting? She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. It's not what it looks like, she muttered. Then what is it? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Help me understand, Nicole, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you're cheating on me. For a moment, she didn't say anything. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Defiance, maybe, or resentment. Fine, she said, throwing up her hands. If you don't believe me, then what's the point of this conversation? Clearly, you've already made up your mind. The sheer audacity of her response took me by surprise. She wasn't apologizing, wasn't even trying to explain anymore. It was as if she was daring me to call her out, daring me to prove her wrong. Nicole, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, I'm giving you a chance to be honest with me. Just tell me the truth. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. The truth. You want the truth? The truth is, you've been paranoid for weeks. You're making something out of nothing. You're the one breaking us, David, not me. Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. She wasn't denying it anymore. She was deflecting, turning the blame back on me. Don't do that, I said, my voice low but firm. Don't try to make this my fault. I didn't send those messages, Nicole. I didn't lie to you. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but then she crossed her arms again, as if she were trying to shield herself. Believe what you want, she said flatly. And with that, she walked out of the room. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every detail from the past few weeks played in my head like a film on repeat. The late nights, the vague excuses, the missing tights, the texts. It all added up to one thing, but I couldn't bring myself to accept it yet. By morning, I'd made a decision. If Nicole wouldn't give me the truth, I'd find it myself. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Nicole's behavior hadn't changed much. If anything, she seemed more guarded. She kept her phone glued to her side and didn't offer much in the way of conversation. On Friday night, she said she had another work dinner. This time, I didn't even ask for details. Instead, I waited until she was gone, then checked the GPS tracker I'd installed on her car earlier in the week. It felt wrong, sneaky even, but I couldn't let that stop me. If she was going to keep lying to my face, I needed proof. The tracker showed her car parked at a residential address about 30 minutes away. Not a restaurant, not her office, but a quiet neighborhood I didn't recognize. I sat there for what felt like hours, debating what to do. Finally, I grabbed my keys and drove to the address. When I pulled up, her car was parked outside a modest two-story house. The lights inside were on, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. My heart pounded as I parked down the street, trying to decide what to do next. I didn't have to wait long. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and Nicole stepped out with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an easy smile. They stood close, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't just a peck, not something you could brush off as friendly. It was slow, intimate, the kind of kiss that spoke of familiarity and desire. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind went blank, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on me all at once. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to be steady. I needed proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or explain away. When they finally went back inside, I sat there for a long time, staring at the darkened street. The emotions came in waves: anger, sadness, disbelief. But one thought rose above all the others. This was it. There was no going back. The next morning, Nicole acted as if everything was normal. She hummed softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. Watching her move around the kitchen, so casual and at ease, made my stomach churn. I had spent the night thinking about how to approach this. Part of me wanted to explode, to demand answers right then and there, but I knew better. If Nicole was willing to look me in the eye and lie about Rob before, she'd try to spin this, too. No, this time I needed to control the narrative. "Morning," she said, flashing me a quick smile. "Morning," I replied, my voice calm but firm. I set my coffee down and leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and she glanced up from her phone. "Okay, what about?" "About last night," I said evenly. Her brow furrowed. "What about it?" "I told you, it was a work dinner. Nothing exciting." "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's funny because I was there. Outside the house you were at. You know, the one where you were kissing Rob on the front porch." The color drained from her face in an instant. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to form words. You followed me," she finally managed to say. "I didn't need to," I shot back, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table between us. "The tracker on your car told me where to go. But just in case you think I'm making this up," I unlocked the phone and opened the photos, sliding it toward her. Nicole's eyes widened as she looked at the screen. I watched her face closely, waiting for her to deny it, to try and explain it away, but all she did was stare. "You lied to me," I said, my voice low but steady. "Over and over again. And for what? To sneak around with some guy while I sit at home wondering why my wife is acting like a stranger." She finally looked up at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "David, Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't even try. I don't want to hear some excuse or some half-baked story. I want the truth, Nicole. All of it." She took a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "It's—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off again. "Don't tell me it's not what I think. I saw you, Nicole. I have proof. What I want to know is why. How long has this been going on? And when were you planning on telling me, if ever?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "You didn't mean for it to happen? So, what, you just accidentally ended up in his arms? Was that before or after you decided to lie to me about where you were going every night?" "It's not like that," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It's not like I don't care about you, David. I do. But things between us." "Don't you dare try to make this about me," I snapped, slamming my hand down on the table. "I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one betraying my marriage vows. That was you, Nicole. So don't sit there and tell me it's because things between us weren't perfect." She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I messed up. I know I did. But it wasn't serious, I swear. Rob doesn't mean anything to me. If he doesn't mean anything to you, then why were you with him?" I demanded. She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. "I don't know," she whispered. I was lonely, okay? You're always so busy with work, and I felt like I wasn't enough for you anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I just stared at her, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical thing. "You felt like you weren't enough for me?" I repeated slowly. "So your solution was to go and find someone else?" "It wasn't like that," she said desperately. "I didn't plan this, David. It just happened." I shook my head, laughing bitterly again. "Nothing just happens, Nicole. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. And now you want me to feel sorry for you because you were lonely." "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice breaking. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll cut things off with Rob. I'll go to therapy. Just, please don't give up on us." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the life we'd built together. But the other part of me, the part that had spent the past few weeks drowning in doubt and suspicion, knew better. "Fix this," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "Nicole, this isn't something you can just fix. You didn't just break my trust. You destroyed it. And I don't think I'll ever be able to get that back." Her face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, David," she whispered. "Please don't leave me." But I'd already made up my mind. I sat across from Nicole in the kitchen, the silence between us so heavy it felt like the room itself was pressing down on me. Her tears came in uneven gasps, but they didn't move me. Not this time. I'd spent the last few weeks hoping, praying, that my suspicions were wrong. But now that the truth was out, there was no going back. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 5 years, the woman I'd married, and felt nothing but a hollow ache where trust used to live. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. Nicole's sobs stopped abruptly, her red-rimmed eyes snapping up to meet mine. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, David, you don't mean that. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear." "You had a chance to fix it, Nicole," I interrupted. "That chance was every day you chose to lie to me. Every day you saw Rob and didn't tell me the truth. You don't get to decide now, after everything, that you want to fix things." "I was scared," she cried. "I didn't want to lose you. I know I messed up, but I love you, David. Please don't do this." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, my mind replaying her words from just minutes ago. "I felt like I wasn't enough for you anymore." The irony of it all was almost laughable. "You love me?" I asked bitterly. "Do you even know what love means, Nicole? Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell doesn't look like it." She flinched like I'd struck her, her tears falling harder now. "I'll end it with Rob," she whispered. "Right now, I'll call him and tell him it's over. I'll block his number. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late for that, I said, my tone unyielding. You already made your choice. You chose him, Nicole, over and over again. You didn't just cheat on me. You betrayed everything we built together. I can't live with that. Her hands clutched at the table, trembling. What about everything we've been through? She pleaded. Doesn't that mean anything to you? You're just going to throw it all away. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. I'm throwing it away? Nicole, I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one lying. If anyone threw this marriage away, it was you. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked so small, so vulnerable, that I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the messages, the late nights, the excuses. I remembered her standing on that porch, kissing another man. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scrape. You need to leave, I said, my voice firm. Leave, she repeated, her eyes wide with disbelief. I need space, I said. I need time to think about how to move forward. And right now, I can't do that with you here. David, please. Don't make this harder than it already is, I said, cutting her off. Pack a bag. Go stay with a friend or a family member. Just go. She stared at me for a long moment, her face a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. Then, without another word, she stood up and walked out of the room. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway, followed by the sound of her pulling a suitcase out of the closet. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the faint sounds of zippers and drawers. When she finally reappeared, her suitcase in hand, her eyes were red and swollen. I'm sorry, she said one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. She stood there for a moment, waiting, but when it became clear I wasn't going to say anything, she turned and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind her was deafening. That night, the house felt impossibly quiet. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I'd spent so long questioning, doubting, wondering if I was being paranoid. Now the truth was laid bare, and all I felt was emptiness. Part of me wanted to break something, to scream, to let out the anger that had been simmering under the surface. But instead, I just sat there, letting the weight of it all settle over me. At some point, I pulled out my phone and opened Reddit. I'd been a lurker on relationship forums for years, reading other people's stories but never sharing my own. Now, I found myself typing. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am. My wife cheated on me. The words flowed out of me, a torrent of emotions I hadn't been able to express aloud. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of something I'd been carrying for far too long. The days after Nicole left were strange, a mixture of numbness and overwhelming clarity. At first, the house felt empty, like her absence was some kind of gaping wound. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't just the house that felt different. I was different. I took the next week off work, unable to focus on anything other than what had happened. The weight of her betrayal lingered like a fog, but in its place was something else, resolve. I didn't need to dwell on the whys, or how could she's, anymore. The truth was simple. She'd made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The morning after Nicole left, I called a lawyer. The conversation was straightforward, clinical. I told them about the cheating, the messages, the evidence I'd gathered. They assured me it was an open and shut case, especially since we didn't have children or complicated finances. Nicole had tried texting me once or twice since leaving. The messages were desperate at first. Pleas for another chance, promises to change. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. A week later, I sent her a message. I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. Please direct any communication about the separation to them. Her response came quickly. David, please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. But I'd already made up my mind. I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in a while. Friends I'd drifted away from because I'd been so caught up in building a life with Nicole. My best friend, Eric, was the first person I told. I knew something was up, he said when I finally shared everything. You've been different lately. Quieter. I just didn't want to pry. Talking to him felt like a lifeline. He didn't try to sugarcoat anything or offer platitudes. He just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. The responses to my Reddit post were similar. Strangers offering advice, sharing their own experiences, reminding me I wasn't alone. It was strange, finding comfort in people I'd never met, but it helped. Nicole's absence became less noticeable as I settled into a new routine. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to fill the hours. I started going to the gym again, something I'd neglected for years. The physical effort was cathartic, a way to channel all the anger and hurt into something constructive. The house slowly began to feel like my space again. I cleared out her belongings, packing them into boxes and dropping them off at a storage unit. Each empty drawer, each bare shelf, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One afternoon, while cleaning out the closet, I found a framed photo of us from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I stared at it for a long time before finally placing it in one of the boxes. It wasn't anger or sadness that made me put it away. It was acceptance. That chapter of my life was over. Nicole and I met one last time to finalize the divorce paperwork. She was quieter than I'd ever seen her, her usual confidence replaced by something fragile. "David," she said softly as we sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, "I'm sorry. For everything. I wish I could take it back." I looked at her, searching for the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago. She was still there, somewhere, but she wasn't the same. Neither was I. "I'm sorry too," I said finally. Not for leaving, but for how this all turned out. "I loved you, Nicole. I really did. But I can't go back to what we had. Too much has happened." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy," she said quietly. "I hope you find yourself," I replied. And with that, we signed the papers, ending the life we'd built together. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The betrayal still hurt, but it didn't define me anymore. I updated my Reddit post one last time. The divorce is finalized, and I'm officially moving on. It's been one of the hardest things I've ever gone through, but I've learned a lot about myself in the process. I've learned that I deserve honesty, respect, and love that isn't conditional. If you're going through something similar, know that it gets better. You're stronger than you think. As I hit post, I felt a sense of closure. The house was quiet, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank slate, a chance to start over. Nicole's betrayal was like a storm that tore through my life, leaving wreckage in its wake. But storms don't last forever, and when the clouds finally cleared, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: myself. The man who'd spent years compromising, forgiving, and second-guessing his instincts was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth. And for the first time in years, I felt free.